Part 2. The 5 Principles of Effectuation. First of all, I have to introduce you to two different logics or ways of thinking, the causal logic and the effectual one. Very often, these two logics are complementary and the one we use depends on the situation. You will have further opportunities to see this on the e-learning platform. But you should ask yourself, what does it mean to speak about the causal and effectual approaches of managing an innovative project? I will take a famous example to illustrate these two approaches. It will probably remind you some situations because it concerns very common events. Imagine that you invite some friends to dinner. To prepare the meal, there are two basic approaches. The first one is the most common. You choose a recipe, and then you list the ingredients that you should buy. In this example, you define the objectives, the recipes, and then purchase the means, the ingredients, to achieve them. This is the causal approach. From the objectives chosen, you determine the necessary resources. Second approach, you open the fridge, you list the ingredients, and then choose a recipe. With this approach, the resources or ingredients define the objectives or recipes. But what are you going to do if an ingredient is missing? Two solutions. First, you can ask your neighbor if he has the ingredients, and maybe you will also invite him to join you. Second, you phone to one of your friends to ask him to bring it. This is the effectual approach. From the resources available, you define the feasible goals. If you consider this diagram, you will understand that the causal approach implies that the initial means are unlimited and can be used in order to achieve your predetermined goal. This approach is more a managerial one and can be useful when your resources are unlimited, such as in a well-established company. On the contrary, the effectual approach implies that you have limited resources and you should think about all possible outcomes. It is more an entrepreneurial approach because the resources of the entrepreneur are usually limited, so he needs to make with the means at his disposal. Now, let us see the different principles associated to the effectual approach, which determine, as you have understood, the logic of actions of an entrepreneur. First, bird-in-hand principle, or making do with resources at hand. This principle follows the saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. The entrepreneur starts with what he has. Who he is, the entrepreneur himself, his family background, etc. What he knows, knowledge, education, trainings, personal or professional experiences. Who he knows, such as family, friends, persons he once crossed. To sum up, today's resources determine the objectives of tomorrow. The entrepreneur's resources are the starting point of the entrepreneurial project. These resources are universal and they allow him to acquire new ones. This principle essentially says, just start, instead of waiting for the perfect conditions to arrive. Second, affordable loss principle. Affordable loss means defining precisely what we are ready to lose in the effort to win as yet undefined rewards. This concerns the entrepreneur's willingness to define and limit his or her losses. So, entrepreneurs spend their energy trying to control the things that they are prepared to lose rather than anticipating the expected gains. Why are they doing this? In fact, this is a pragmatic approach because in an entrepreneurial project, it is easier to estimate the cost than to control the future income. Indeed, today the costs are certain, whereas tomorrow the income is uncertain. So you should remember that wanting to predict the future is illusory because there are too many uncertainties. So the entrepreneur can take risks, but they do their best to control and limit them. But how? By setting very clear boundaries concerning the affordable loss. For example, They accept to live with their storage capacity for 6 months or 1 year, by sharing the risk-taking with others. This last point touches on a very essential element of the entrepreneurial venture, the social dimension of the entrepreneurship. Third, lemonade principle. This principle is inspired by the aphorism, "If life gives you lemons, make lemonade." In other words, if life seems initially unfair by giving you bitter things, such as the lemons, then use them to make something sweet, such as the lemonade. This is the opportunism principle. The surprises, good or bad, play a positive role in the innovation. And following the serendipity principle, many discoveries are due to chance and how we make full use of it. This principle is important and unusual compared to a traditional management approach where you learn how to avoid taking risks. We are more used to planning using the causal logic. However, as we have already seen, it is difficult to make predictions and surprises happen very often. So, it is a waste of time trying to avoid them. It is better to be interested in surprises and take advantage of them. This principle teaches us not to waste time protecting ourselves against all possible risks, to accept what may appear at first as unwanted surprises, to being opportunistic, to learn how to redefine objectives in light of surprises that change the original aim, to remain open to the unexpected because opportunity often emerges from activities initiated with a very different goal from the one originally envisaged. Fourth, crazy quilt principle, or form partnerships. The patchwork is a sewing technique involving the assembly of several pieces of fabric of different sizes, shapes, and colors. The final pattern is a priori unknown, so the result is unpredictable and depends on the contribution made by each volunteer. In relation to the effectual approach, this principle means that each stakeholder, family, friends, customers, suppliers, partners, etc., bring resources which orientate the final result without knowing in advance what the final result will be. So, the entrepreneurial project is first a social process. The entrepreneur brings out objectives based on available resources. These resources can increase with the commitments made by new stakeholders who bring new resources. Thus, new objectives emerge over time with the new resources. These resources allow the project to progress. So, the progression of a project depends on the involvement of new partners in the project. You should understand now that the great idea is not necessarily the starting point of a project. It may or not come later. This principle teaches us not to waste our time planning and finding a great idea. It's much better to work with stakeholders very early in the project. Fifth, the pilot in the plane. The pilot is not passive in a non-controlled environment. He is active, flies his craft in a particular direction, transforming the environment as he does so. For the entrepreneur, no trend is inevitable, no market is frozen, and everything is a raw material transformable by contractor. This principle teaches us never to take the current situation as a given. Remind yourself that the market rules exist only because nobody tried or succeeded yet in changing them. Examine market studies with a critical eye because they consist in reproducing the present. Entrepreneurs regard the environment as they would like it to look, not as it already is. Give priority to action rather than analysis. In conclusion, effectuation is enabling entrepreneurial projects that a priori seem impossible with a causal approach. Effectuation allows us to envisage the possibility of doing something because of the progressive implementation of the means, very few initially and increasing progressively, implementation based on a growing network like stakeholders that constitutes a barrier to entry for competitors arriving later, an approach which allows very fast growth with leverage on the resources via stakeholders. To sum up, let's have another look at the entrepreneurial process. The project starts from resources. The entrepreneur asks himself, who I am, what do I know, who do I know? Then the goals emerge. I have a wish but no solution, so I try to find a solution. What can I do? The goals lead him to interact with his family and other stakeholders. This is followed by the interaction with new people, and possibly the stakeholder commitments. This leads to gathering new resources which support the idea of the entrepreneur. New means allow him or her to imagine new goals. Defining new goals involves interacting with people and new stakeholder commitments. This leads to new, more ambitious goals. As regards the means, there is an expanding cycle of resources. And as regards the goals, there is an expanding cycle of goals. This cyclical repetitive process composed of resources, stakeholders, new resources, and new goals repeats itself. This constitutes the process of entrepreneurial creation within the perspective of the effectual approach. After a while, this process leads to the creation of a new business and a new market. But what happens if no commitment from stakeholders is obtained? The project will lead to a dead end, or the opportunity has to be put on hold. The effectuation approach is a valuable theory based on solid field research to explain what entrepreneurs actually do. Effectuation expounds 5 practical principles as the basis of the entrepreneur's means of action. To summarize, the starting point of the project equals the individual. 1. The idea equals an individual plus a trigger. 2. The opportunity equals the idea plus action. 3. A viable project is an opportunity triggering interest from an increasing number of stakeholders. And remember that a project which interests no one is not viable. Here's a small reminder sheet with the 5 effectual principles. First, bird-in-hand principle, or making do with resources at hand. Second, affordable loss principle. Third, lemonade principle. Fourth, crazy kit principle, or form partnerships. Fifth, the pilot in the plane. Now, the presentation of effectuation is ended. Let's go to the next part of the e-learning platform.